Hello, and thank you for joining our Teaching for 21st Century webinar brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov. I'm your host, Annie Cyrus. Please feel free to use the Q&A box on your screen if you have any questions. I have waited too long, so I'm not going to drag this any longer. It is such an honor and privilege to introduce our very special guest this evening, Robert Spencer. Not that he needs an introduction, but I have dreamed of this moment for long. He is the director of Jihad Watch, also a Shellman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. He is the author of 21 books. My favorite, The Truth About Mohammed. And he does have a new book. I'm sure he's going to tell us about it. Robert, hi.
Hi, Annie. Good to see you.
It is fantastic to see you. I'm excited. Everybody's excited. So floor is yours.
Well, great. Thank you all for being here tonight. I guess there are people out there, and it's still something, takes some getting used to speak to no audience. But in any case, the subject tonight is a little bit different for me. It's not about jihad or terrorism or Islam. It's about history. And there are a few quotes that I thought would be interesting to start with. One is by William Faulkner: "The past is not dead, it is not even past." Another is from George Orwell in 1984, when he says, "Who controls the past controls the future, and who controls the present controls the past." And then there is an adage that has been attributed to several people: history is written by the victors. And this is the challenge that we face today to a tremendous degree in the United States, is who is going to write our history. And this has extraordinarily important implications. You may remember history as being a dry and dull class in high school. I hope not, but it may be that you think of it as a bit of irrelevancy, something that you had to get through. That is certainly a view that many Americans have. But what we have seen recently from the left, and it's been brewing for years, if not decades, is an all-out attempt to rewrite and control American history. But it's not about controlling the past. As Orwell said, it's about controlling the present and the future by means of rewriting our past. And we have, unfortunately, people who love America and love freedom have, in all too many cases, allowed this to happen. They have treated the left like the victors. And maybe you could say they have been the victors in the culture war, at least up to now. And so they have been allowed to write the history. And they wrote it from their own perspectives. Now, the insidious aspect of this has come clear recently. We saw that before President Trump stiffened the penalties sharply for tearing down statues, that Antifa and Black Lives Matter were tearing down statues all over the country, first of Confederate generals, and arguably you could say, well, that's not a good thing to celebrate, the Confederate states and slavery and so on. But it was forgotten in all that controversy that the statues of the Confederate leaders were only constructed as part of the national healing, as part of a recognition that there were good people on both sides, without any retreat from the idea that slavery was immoral and wrong. The nation was being generous to the vanquished and not acknowledging that there were people who were noble and heroic on both sides. This is something nowadays that is completely misunderstood or lost. Nowadays, everyone on the right is evil as far as the left is concerned. And if you don't go along entirely with the leftist agenda, then you are entirely outside the bounds of reasonable discourse and even polite society. And this is what they've been doing with the past. It started out with the Confederate generals, but then Trump said, you know, where's it going to end? It's going to be that they're going to start targeting Washington and Jefferson. And people scoffed and said, well, look what an idiot he is. They're never going to target Washington and Jefferson. They just don't like these old Confederates. And then they started targeting Washington and Jefferson, not even just Washington and Jefferson either, but Abraham Lincoln, whose statue was removed in Boston, and even Frederick Douglass, whose statue was toppled, I forget where it was, but I think somewhere in upstate New York. And Ulysses S. Grant, the general who essentially won the Civil War. So it was clear that an agenda far beyond just we don't like racism and slavery was operating here. And the conservatives, the supporters of the president, are only waking up now to what this is. And what it actually is an all-out assault to make us ashamed of ourselves, to make us ashamed of America, ashamed of being American, ashamed of the record that America has in history, internationally and domestically. And what would be the objective of that? What's the end game? What's the point of that? It is to control the present and control the future. If you are ashamed of your own country, your culture, and your heritage, how fervently are you going to defend it against those who would wish to control you and destroy your country and your culture and your heritage and your nation? Obviously, if you hate all these things, if you think that American history is just an unbroken record of racism and oppression, slavery, imperialism, colonialism, everything that the left hates the most, then you're not going to defend it. You're not going to stand up. And if you are the exponent, as Antifa and Black Lives Matter are, of an international agenda of socialism, Marxism, and authoritarian government that denies the freedom of speech, denies the right to bear arms, denies many of the protections that we are afforded by the US Constitution, then you're going to target the United States as being the foremost exponent, your foremost opposition, the foremost exponent of an opposing point of view. And consequently, you're going to try to destroy the United States, both from without and from within. Now, it's very hard to destroy the United States from without because who has a military that can stand up to the US military? But it's a lot easier to destroy it from within. And controlling our history is a foremost aspect of that. And so this is why it is all the more important for Americans now, for freedom lovers now, for conservatives now, for dissidents of all kinds from the leftist agenda, to understand that it is important for us to know our history. It is not a dry academic exercise. It is not about names and dates and dusty books. It is about preserving our heritage and our way of life, and helping our children and our children's children and those around us understand why we do have a nation that's worth defending, and why we should stand up to these insidious elements and stop them in their tracks before they destroy the nation. Because the nation actually has a marvelous record, an unparalleled record of defense of human rights, of work against racism, and work for the principle of the equality of rights of all people under the law, and many other things. There is no other country in the world that can point to a record like that which the United States of America has in working toward these things. There is no other country in the world, or maybe few others, I don't know of any other, maybe some of you can tell me of some, where a member of a formerly despised and discriminated against minority became the president. Now, I don't have anything good to say about Barack Obama except that. The fact that he was able to become president is testimony to the fact that his own narrative and the narrative of his party about systemic racism is false. And America actually has made more strides against race prejudice than virtually any other country in the world. And so what I thought needed to be done was a certain reclamation of American history, a reclamation project that would recall to mind for Americans what made the country great and what can and should make the country great again. And that goes back to a principle enunciated very succinctly on numerous occasions by the president, by President Trump. And that is, he said, I am not the president of the world, I'm the president of the United States. Now, that's a very simple, that's a very lapidary formulation. I'm not the president of the world, I'm the president of the United States is an extraordinary repudiation of the policies that his predecessors have followed for decades, both Republicans and Democrats, that have taken it for granted, who have taken it for granted, that America has some responsibility to, in the old parlance, be the world's policeman, or to make sure, to make the world safe for democracy, in even older parlance. That was Woodrow Wilson's excuse for getting us into World War I in 1917. If it's up to us to make the world safe for democracy, then we're going to expend our resources helping other states, other countries have good government, while America's people fall deeper into poverty and our infrastructure crumbles and so on. It only makes sense for the President of the United States to take care of Americans first, to try to make Americans safer, stronger, more prosperous, and for other countries too, for their heads of state, to try to make their people safer, stronger, and more prosperous, and not to depend upon outside aid any more than we depend on outside aid. And so I wrote this book, Rating America's Presidents, an America First guide, an America First look at who's best, who's overrated, and who's an absolute disaster, in order to evaluate American history on the basis of which of our chief executives were presidents of the United States and not presidents of the world, which of them put America first. Now there's a phrase that is much misunderstood, much maligned, much misrepresented. People have characterized it as xenophobic, as nativist, and even as isolationist, sometimes even as anti-Semitic. These things have nothing to do with genuine America First principles. America First doesn't mean that America withdraws from the world. It means that in our dealings with the world, we are putting our own country and our own people first, and not those of other countries. It's just common sense. For example, George H.W. Bush, the first Bush president, he got us involved in Somalia militarily. There was no national interest. There was no point. There was no goal. The only problem was that the Somalis had not been able to come together under a unified government, and people were suffering. I'm very sorry people were suffering in Somalia, and we have Ilhan Omar to show for it. But the reality of it is that there are people suffering all over the world, and it is not the responsibility of the United States or any other nation to make sure that every other nation in the world has good government and that its people aren't suffering. There was no military interest, no economic interest, no political interest for our being in Somalia. And even worse, Bill Clinton, the successor of George H.W. Bush, actually withdrew from Somalia. It was bad enough that we got in, and then it was even worse how we left. Not that we left. It was good that we left, but it was bad how we left. You remember the Black Hawk incident when Somalis downed an American helicopter, and some people were killed and the corpses were dragged through the streets and so on. And Bill Clinton immediately withdrew the American troops. Now, that was universally understood as a sign of weakness. And one of the people who saw it that way was a man named Osama bin Laden, who said that he saw the Americans' response to the Black Hawk incident, that they suffered some casualties and they cut and run, and he saw that America was weak. And he stepped up his jihad efforts because America was weak and had shown itself to be weak, and that led us to 9/11. So if George H.W. Bush had been putting America first, he never would have gotten us involved in that in the first place. And who knows, maybe 9/11 wouldn't have happened. If we had been taking care of American interests first, we would not have been in Afghanistan for the last 17 years, but would have toppled the Taliban, closed the Al-Qaeda training camps, and quarantined the nation so that it could no longer export jihad activity. That's it. You don't need troops on the ground to do that. But throughout history, there are many other presidents who have been committed to internationalist courses that have weakened America. There are many other presidents besides Barack Obama and Bill Clinton who have been committed to a massive expansion of the federal government and a discarding of constitutional norms, which is very dangerous because the Constitution, of course, is what protects us from tyranny. So rating America's presidents is an evaluation of each president on this basis of, did they put America first? Did America and Americans emerge from their presidency stronger, more prosperous than they were when they went in, safer, etc.? Or did the opposite happen and they ended up worse off? And on that basis, there are quite a few surprises in the book. Some presidents who are thought of as great, because remember, the left has controlled the histories for long before they were tearing down statues. And so leftists have been writing American history and telling our story, and we haven't been telling counter stories. And so a lot of the people that we take for granted in American history as having been great presidents were actually disastrous for the United States, notably Wilson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Barack Obama, who is celebrated all the more nowadays, and many others, whereas there are some who are failures, like notably Warren G. Harding, who is almost universally derided as a failed president. He actually rolled back regulations, cut taxes. He restored constitutional probity in the sense of turning back, repealing some of the regulations that Wilson had put in during World War I, suppressing dissent. Eugene V. Debs, the socialist leader, had actually been imprisoned solely for the crime of disagreeing with American involvement in World War I. Harding freed him. Whatever you think about socialists or Eugene V. Debs, he was wrongly imprisoned. And Harding returned us to constitutional norms, got the economy booming in what is, of course, now known as the Roaring 20s. Maybe we'll have another Roaring 20s now, but only if the American people who love America take back our history now and write the history as the victors that we have been, and one hopes will be again. I will pause there and thank you very much. And if you have questions or comments or agreements or disagreements, then let's go.
That sounds brilliant. Can I start with first question of my own? So the left is mainly controlling our schools. 95% of what is taught to our children is the left. How do we fix that? How do we teach children who are being taught the wrong history or lies? How do we reverse that?
This is going to be a massive process. And the president has already started it rolling by his explicit repudiation of the 1619 Project, which is an attempt to portray all of American history as about racism and depression. And he has called for the establishment of a 1776 commission that will, one hopes, move toward this, but it's going to be a huge effort. One of the things we can and should do immediately is cut off all federal money for colleges and universities, especially colleges and universities where conservative speakers are banned from speaking or shouted down and not allowed to speak. If all points of view are not given a platform, then no federal money should be given. If the freedom of speech is not respected, then no federal money should be given. And there needs to be a thoroughgoing reform, a thoroughgoing investigation and reform of public school textbooks such that it is ensured that they do not teach and inculcate hatred of our own country. But it's going to be a huge thing. It took the left. It started in the 1960s with what is known as the Long March through the institutions. The hippies in the 60s, Bill Clinton and them, I don't know if Bill Clinton did this, but you know, they were taking over college offices and having sit-ins and demanding whatever reforms they wanted. And the college administrators would nod and smile and usher them out of the office, and that was the end. And so they realized the only way they were going to get real change was to actually take over the college themselves. But that was going to be a long process, and they did it. One leftist professor would be hired, and then he would recommend others. And finally, they controlled the entire hiring process and only hired their peers. And now our colleges and universities are all these dreary Maoist one-party states that only allow one point of view. All that has to be rolled back. In the first place, by withholding the money. In the second place, by breaking the stranglehold of this one ideology, and mandating that that even-handedness be practiced and the freedom of speech respected.
Amen. Hopefully it works. I have a question here for you that is not exactly about the topic, but it's somehow related. Is the Muslim Brotherhood linked to Black Lives Matter movement?
Yes, the Muslim Brotherhood is linked to the Black Lives Matter movement. In the first place, there have been several members of Muslim Brotherhood linked organizations. Zahra Bilou of the Council on American Islamic Relations, San Francisco chapter. Of course, CARE is it has been identified by the Justice Department as linked to Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. It was listed as one of the allied organizations in that infamous captured internal document of the Muslim Brotherhood that said that the brothers must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. Anyway, Zahra Bilou has repeatedly and warmly endorsed Black Lives Matter, called upon Muslims to participate in it. Imran Siddiqui, who I believe is with ISNA, but I'm not sure, but he's likewise applauded the riots. Linda Sarsour, who of course is deeply tied into the Brotherhood network in the United States, she was seen just last night in Louisville participating in the protests that turned into riots in which two police officers were shot. And more to the point even than that is the fact that as far back as 2015, Black Lives Matter sent a delegation over to Gaza to train for what it was doing. And of course, Gaza is controlled by Hamas, which styles itself as the Muslim Brotherhood for Palestine. So yeah, this is a leftist Islamic alliance, and it goes back several years. This has been almost completely unreported upon, but if you go to Jihad Watch, jihadwatch.org, you will find, if you search for Black Lives Matter, the news article from 2015 in which numerous Black Lives Matter officials are speaking about what they learned in Gaza and what a wonderful experience they had there.
Muslim Brotherhood. Sometimes I feel like from CARE to Hamas to Hezbollah, they're technically, by definition of the meaning of the word, they are Muslim Brotherhood, all of them, right?
Well,
they're just doing the same common goal.
They have a common goal, yeah, but the Muslim Brotherhood is an organization, and it's a Sunni organization out of Egypt. It's international now, but Hezbollah, of course, is Shiite. They have essentially the same goals. They wouldn't hesitate to work together, but you can't really say Hezbollah is Muslim Brotherhood in the sense of being a part of the organization.
Oh no, they have the final battle to settle when they get rid of all of us.
Yeah,
and
then they'll turn on each other.
Fight each other.
Indeed.
Next question is, what can be done to make the media, mainstream media, reporting more fair?
One of the main things that can be done now is remove the protections that are in Section 230 of the, the Communications Decency Act. In any case, it's Section 230, that you can look that up and see exactly what it's part of. But it removes the social media giants from legal liability for their biases because they're supposedly neutral platforms. Now, of course, they're not. And so this should be removed. It should have already been removed. And that would go a long way toward fixing this problem, because President Trump won in 2016 because the mainstream media narrative was challenged on the internet. And people knew that the mainstream media was not being honest with them, and they could go to the internet for the facts. And then, because the election was lost as far as they were concerned, they have been cracking down on the internet and stifling dissent on the social media giants, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and so on. And so if that could be reversed, but really it's getting very late now in terms of the November 2020 election anyway. But if that has to be reversed, that's one thing. And then, of course, if there are any legal protections that the big networks enjoy, then the so-called news networks, I don't know of any, but it may be that there's some, then those need to be removed. But I think in general, what all people need to do with whatever platform they have is point out how viciously unfair these people are, how false their narrative is. And more people are waking up to that all the time. You know, it's been going on for decades. People don't realize. There was a book published in the early 60s, The News Twisters, which was about media bias, which was much milder then than it is now. And I remember my father in the late 60s cursing at Walter Cronkite on the news every night because he was characterizing things inaccurately from a politically biased perspective. But now, of course, this is unprecedented, this 100% propaganda against the president. And so it really is kind of self-refuting because people are seeing through it more and more, especially when they do things like, did you see on CNN, the president held the ceremony for the signing of the peace treaties between Israel and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. And CNN's headline was, "Large Gathering at White House Ignores Social Distancing." So they didn't mention the peace treaties. They were only trying to focus on what they thought was a negative aspect. And so people know that there were these peace treaties, or at least a lot of people do, and that CNN is not being honest. But we have to be able to speak about that, or otherwise they can just continue to lie to us unchallenged. So I would say the social media restrictions the social media protections, the protections for the big social media corporations have to be removed first and foremost.
Okay, next question is going to take us outside of America. Can we have a good relation with Putin and Russia?
I don't see why not. You know, the president has several times pointed out that the media is completely obsessed with Russia, and a completely debunked idea that Russia fixed the 2016 election and threw it to Trump, that has been massively investigated at the cost of millions, if not billions of dollars, and nothing was found. And yet China has clearly been draining American industries for years, undercutting American businesses with prices that we cannot match because they have slave labor making things in China, and then is responsible for this COVID-19 pandemic, and they don't say anything about China. And so why can't we have good relations with Russia that has not been a threat since the Cold War? It's really bitterly ironic how I remember, I'm old enough to remember, kids, that back in the 70s, the left would sneer at people like Ronald Reagan. This was before he was president, but they sneered at him while he was president as well, for acting as if the Soviet Union was a threat, and sneered at conservatives claiming that they supposedly hated Russia. Why? It was tougher to put that across because you couldn't really say it was racist or, you know, their favorite tropes. But nonetheless, we hated Russia, and that's why we were all paranoid about communism. And really, communism was nothing to worry about. The Soviet Union was nothing to worry about. We should have détente and get along with them. And then the Soviet Union falls, thanks to Ronald Reagan. It's all in the book. And communism in the Soviet Union disappears. Eastern Europe is free. China is still communist. And Russia starts to get back on its feet. And now you have a man who's certainly, admittedly, an authoritarian ruler. Russia's never had anything else. It doesn't have a republican tradition, a tradition of one man, one vote and all that. It just doesn't exist there. But Putin is energetically working to revive the church in Russia and have a a revival of Christianity and Christian values there. This is not something we should hate. And now Russia is the big enemy as far as the left is concerned, when it no longer is our foremost threat, and when it is being restructured on values that are massively different from those of Marxists. Well, maybe that's why the left hates Russia now, because they're Marxists, and Russia has left the reservation.
Yeah, that would not fit their narrative. Now, the next question is asking, what about Antifa? Is Antifa Muslim Brotherhood as well?
Antifa, I do not know of any actual connections between Antifa and the Muslim Brotherhood in terms of training or mutual support or anything of that kind. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if there were, but I don't know of any. However, I can tell you one thing. They certainly understand that they have a commonality of interests and a similarity of goals, and they don't hesitate to work together. I experienced this personally when I spoke in Germany in 2010, I believe it was, and it was a big outdoor rally, and they took me there. The people who invited me, it was in Stuttgart, they took me there. I was kind of amazed because there were like a couple of hundred police cars there, and they were all for our little rally. But it turned out that it was because Antifa had shown up to disrupt our proceedings. And the problem with that was we weren't talking about Marxism. We weren't talking about the left. We were talking about Islamization, Sharia, jihad, and so on. But Antifa thought that that was a challenge to them. And so they came out, they threw rocks, they threw bottles, they threw manure, they threw everything they could think they could get their hands on. And it was the same thing also in Germany. Around the same time, I spoke in Berlin, and Antifa came to break up the rally, and they were screaming Nazis, raus. And I thought it's interesting that they are working for the protection of an authoritarian system that denies the freedom of speech, denies equality of rights to women, is openly embracing of violence and so on, and we're the Nazis. It was kind of ironic, but they were here there again, they were acting on behalf of Islamic groups and not because we were challenging the left in any way.
We have Muslim Brotherhood, we have Hamas, we have CARE, we have BLM, we have Antifa, and then we have Democrats. Mm-hmm. Lord have mercy on us and our survivor, which takes me to the next question. Question says, Robert, I admire your drive to keep going on this fight. What keeps you hopeful that we will have a future as the left is wrecking our history?
The only thing we can do is keep going. I mean, you know, I'll tell you something. I'm a native of the great state of South Carolina, and the state of South Carolina has a motto, Dum Spiro Spero, which means, while I breathe, I hope. When I was a kid, I thought it had something to do with Spiro Agnew, but it didn't. Do you know who Spiro Agnew was? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Dum Spiro Spero, while I breathe, I hope. They haven't won yet. They don't control everything yet. There are plenty of dissenters now, and many more people waking up to what they're all about because of what they've been doing with these riots and so on. And so now is not the time to lose heart. Now is the time to keep going all the more energetically, because they are lashing out because they are threatened, and they are threatened because they see a challenge to their hegemony such as has not been since their hegemony was established. And that is Trump and what he represents. A repudiation, as I said right at the beginning, a repudiation of their internationalism, a repudiation of the drift towards socialism, a repudiation of the managed decline of America, and they're deeply threatened. And so it's going to be very ugly because they are very evil. But we got a good shot here to prevail in this.
I'd love to hear that. But next question is the really a God forbid question. If Biden wins, do you think that he will be beholden to China?
Yes. If Biden wins, I think the nightmare scenarios are practically limitless, because You have Pelosi, you have Ayanna Pressley, you have many other Democratic lawmakers, so to speak, who are actually openly endorsing and calling for violence. Now, you can find the videos, they're not hard to find. And that they're not going to suddenly decide that they don't need political violence anymore once they have won. They're just going to keep using it as a weapon in their arsenal. And they're clearly against the freedom of speech because they're locked in with the social media giants who are trying to choke us off. And they, of course, are very open about wanting to confiscate our weapons, which is, of course, the Second Amendment was put into the Constitution so that we would have a protection against the tyrant. And Beto O'Rourke says, hell yeah, I'm going to take your guns. And, President Biden or President Harris or President whoever it turns out to be that they pick when they can't keep propping up Biden anymore, he could appoint or she could appoint Beto O'Rourke to do exactly that. And so it could be very bad. It could be the end of America as a free society, the end of our constitutional republic. Cannot be the risk, the threat cannot be overstated. However, even at that point, like I said just a minute ago, it ain't over. It ain't over till it's over. Even if they win, they still have to wake up the next morning, and maybe they'll have a massive uprising on their hands. So don't lose heart. You have to keep fighting.
Okay, how do we stop the funding of riots in America?
We got to find out who's funding them. I have an idea. I bet you have an idea too. And he has to be stopped, Mr. Soros. But that's a very difficult thing because you're talking about somebody. How does he even make money? I tried to find that out once. Well, what does he sell? And it's all very shady. It has to do with finance capital that I only dimly understand anyway. But he has so much money, so many hundreds of billions of dollars. It's going to be very difficult. But one example that we have is the nation of Hungary. And of course, Soros is a Hungarian native. But Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, has banned him from the country and led an active campaign to limit and end his influence over Hungarian politics. I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from that and follow out, implement here in the United States.
Okay, this might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask, is there any way legally he could be stopped for funding terrorism? Because that's basically what it is, right?
Yeah, but that's a step-by-step process. The president said he was going to declare Antifa a terrorist group. I don't think he's done that yet, if I recall correctly. Did I miss it?
I have not heard of it yet.
Yeah, I don't think he did it.
But I don't think he finalized it.
If he could do that, then you could go after their financiers. But it's all very shadowy and indirect. I mean, the left still insists. Gerald Nadler and others have insisted. Antifa doesn't even exist. It's just a group of people who hold the same views. But if you look at the rallies, they're all dressed the same way, which is a uniform. They all have these insignia that are all the same. It's an army. And it's clearly organized. The announcement about the prosecution of the police in the Breonna Taylor case in Louisville was announced, and immediately U-Haul drives up full of supplies for the Antifa rallies or protests or riots. And so clearly somebody is paying for all this, and that means it really is an organization that has people who do take care of its finances. And so that can be found and stopped.
Okay, we covered education, we covered mainstream media, BLM and Antifa. Here's a question, it's actually a repeated question. Professional athletes, Hollywood celebrities, music industry artists have a profound effect on our youth. Their messages are often misleading, untruthful, and profane. How can we expose their hatred?
All these questions about how we can expose things depends on whether we have a platform. And that depends on what I was talking about before, regarding the social media giants and so on. But I can tell you one thing about sports. I followed baseball for 49 years. This year would have been the 50th, but I haven't watched a single game since I don't know when. This is the first time in probably since I was 9 years old or so that I haven't watched a baseball game in the summer. And usually I watch 100 or so baseball games every summer. So this is a major change for me. And I did this because of course, the athletes kneeling for the anthem. And because if you go to MLB.com, Major League Baseball's website, you will find on the side a section called something like Resources for Allyship and Combating Racism. And it's full of Marxist agitprop, condemning the United States as a racist entity and so on. And I saw that and I thought, well, there's no way I can't support this. And clearly they don't want me around either. They don't want people who love America to watch their games. Then I'm not going to watch. And I have announced this several times on Twitter. Not that I care, that people care what I watch and don't. And I don't have an exaggerated sense of my own importance. But the point is that they have to know that people are turning off what they have to offer because of their biases. They have to know that so that maybe they'll reconsider, because after all, people are playing baseball because they want to make money. And if more of us turn it off, they won't make money. And then they might think, maybe we should go back to the days when sports wasn't political. Nobody knew if Babe Ruth or Ted Williams were Republicans or Democrats. Nobody cared. And so, and notably, Jackie Robinson, who was the first Black player in the major leagues, was a Republican who campaigned for Nixon. But anyway, this is that was a sidelight to the fact that most ball players, the most athletes, were up until quite recently apolitical, up until Colin Kaepernick, and it was understood that these things were outside the realm of politics. But now everything, the left has politicized everything, and so we have to step up and say, all right, you are declaring that you're only for this one group, then those are the only people going to watch you. I don't know how many Antifa soy boys watch baseball, but if that's what they want, that's what they'll get. But all of you should do the same thing. See, I can tell you, I'll tell you something. I know a guy, he was saying that he had worked for organized sports for decades. And he had actually just been speaking with some Major League Baseball executives, and they told him that, well, they have to do this because they know that if they don't, their stadiums could get burned down, the left will target them, and so on. True, okay. So they're just sort of paying protection to the mafia. It's that kind of thing. But they also said, we also know that people on the right may complain, but they'll sneak back and watch the game. Can't do it. Got to turn it off. And that goes for your favorite singers, everybody. They have to know that we're not going to accept this. And if more of us do that, then they'll stop. Or even if they don't stop, others will come out courageously on our side.
That is very true. Another thing, if you don't mind me adding, Robert, you published a piece on it on jihadwatch.org. I actually did a live feed about it. But when it comes to entertainment industry, a movie came out last weekend, Inferno. Support that movie. They broke record the opening weekend with 1.5 million coming on the second highest sales. We can continue supporting them. I mean, I think you would agree, Robert. We are at times where when one group of people have the bravery to produce a movie like Inferno, where it tells the truth. I have watched the movie myself, and I can testify that every word, every moment, every second of this movie was truth, absolutely not filtered, not censored, not sugar-coated, of how they are treating Christians in Middle East, especially if you're an American Christian. We can get out there and support them, so hopefully they can make more movies, which I'm still actually amazed, how did they do that?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, friends, you should see that movie, even if you're not interested, just to support the fact that it was made and the people who made it. And conversely, I just discovered earlier today, I still can't get over this, but I saw an ad for a new movie or TV show or something that is all about James Comey and what a hero he is, starring one of the most ridiculous leftist actors in Hollywood, Jeff Daniels, who has run down America on many occasions. And he's starring as the heroic FBI James Comey. Of course, James Comey presided over the deep state coup to try to remove President Trump by framing him for crimes he didn't commit, and has presided over the politicization of the FBI, whereas what it used to be an intelligence agency, now it's a deeply and sharply partisan and essentially worthless agency that only prosecutes people for political, largely only prosecutes people for political reasons. James Comey is a hero. James Comey is one of the worst Americans who ever lived. So don't see that, even if you're interested and want to see what they did, and you know, kind of like not being able to turn away from a car wreck. Have some character. Don't look at the car wreck, and don't watch the heroic Comey movie.
Agreed. We need to learn what they started. Boycott. Boycott yes. What is not good for our history, our past, present, future. Just boycott everything. I know it's hard. I had a hard time canceling my Netflix. I did. But I did it. I just sit there and play games on my phone if I have free time. But yes, I agree. Here's the very last question for you. Well, it's two questions, Robert. One, where do people go to get all the information? I know we probably know the answers. Secondly, is your book out yet? And if it is, where do we get it?
Yes, jihadwatch.org. That is, of course, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, updated many times daily with news and commentary about jihad activity in the United States and around the world. Also, because I am the founder and editor-in-chief, I put up other writing that I do about other subjects, which I've been doing increasingly lately, particularly about various political issues. The book is out. It's beautiful. See, isn't it nice? Thick too. And it is available at Amazon, available at Barnes & Noble. If there's a brick and mortar bookstore that still exists near you, go there, ask them to order it. A lot of them are run by hard leftists, but tell them that we have a thing called the freedom of speech in this country, and they shouldn't suppress the voices of dissidents, and should be able to get it. But in any case, yes, it is out now, and it is the first pushback to the 1619 Project and all that. I was actually calling it the 1776 Project, and then the president started his 1776 Commission, and I thought, well, call me, Mr. President. I already been working on this. I got it for you right here. But anyway, you can give him my number. It's okay. Thank you very much, folks.
Of course, here's the thing. Everybody here watching or watching later. As far as jihadwatch.org goes, Robert, I hope you don't mind me saying this. As an ex-Muslim who had to get over a habit of doing a prayer 5 times a day, Jihad Watch saved me. I just checked jihadwatch.org 5 times a day. I'm good.
Thank you.
Do that.
I love that.
And get Robert's book. 1, we need to learn. 2, we need to support. Remember, boycott bad books, buy good books. If you can afford it, buy a couple of copies, give it to your neighbors and to your family members. Robert, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and it's always something or more than one thing to learn from you. So thank you so much for being here.
You're very kind, Annie. Thanks very much. Have a great evening.
Of course. And to our audience who has stayed with us until now, thank you so much. And remember, these webinars are brought to you by David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang for free. So if you like to support these webinars, consider going to frontpagemag.com and make 100% tax-deductible donation. With that being said, until next week, stay safe and goodbye.